Hello again. My name is Antonio, and in this video, I'm gonna go over, we're gonna color, and I'm gonna go over the medium of watercolor. Um, I hope everyone is well. You have heard me go over many of these things, but it will be good for me, I thought, and you to put it all in a video, do a summary, review the main points, and then get on. And for the second half of our 2 hours, we're going to make a painting. Okay, but first we're going to do many exercises. Okay, and I want you to really understand and familiarize with watercolor. So listen to what I say. um, More than samples, I will be talking a lot about the medium, and with your practice, right, on your own time, you can get a better understanding and be more confident about watercolor, which is something that is key to have. So the materials we have today is the paper. This is very, very important. Watercolor paper. I believe this may be um, 140, 140 pounds. This paper is measured um, by weight. It's not what the paper weight, but when it's made, I believe my understanding is the pressure that is given. And the higher the number, the thicker the paper. Okay, so I recommend, if you're gonna purchase watercolor paper, to always go 90 up, but 140 is the standard. And that is to make sure that the water gets sucked into the paper and the paper can handle it. Okay, so as you can see, it's very thick paper. It has a softer kind of side and a more texture one. You're gonna paint on the texture one. Handmade watercolor papers tend to be obviously both sides with texture, but industrial, they keep a more softer side. And my understanding again is also because it's treated and it can retain the water from the bottom side. So there's a top side and a bottom side. You're gonna paint where the texture is. So we got a watercolor paper. Again, try to purchase it 90 pounds or higher. It's expensive paper. And the higher the number, the more expensive, or the more when it's made, with attention, like I said, handmade, then it will obviously be more expensive. I have two containers, small containers. They don't need to be big for the water. I'll explain why too. I got my brushes. We need basically one of them. I'm gonna keep actually the one I need, and I'll bring the two soon to explain them. But the more brushes you have, obviously, the better, because then you don't have to clean your brush as often. You can keep it down with the color you just used. But if you just if you're having one brush, it should be let me pour my water. It should be the round tip. So I got clean water. The way I get clean water, just room temperature, is pouring it from my cold water at the sink. I say cold water because hot water tends to bring some things in it sometimes, and it's not clear. I don't know if you knew that. Just heating the water just doesn't keep the water, bring things into the water. So I poured 2 cups of water, 2 containers. And the reason is because one we'll be using to clean our brush, and one we'll be using to keep clean water accessible. And then when we need to wet our paper, we have clean water, right? We're not painting because the water will not be with color. I say this, and at the same time, eventually the water will get dirty just because of the work. So we're gonna try to keep it as clean as possible as long as we can. I got my paints. You could use any type of paints that are watercolor. Let me explain this just like any other paint. You know, sometimes you go to a store and you hear, oh, this is studio paint or this is student paint. Well, student obviously will be cheaper and it will have less pigment and is made with less attention, and studio paint has more pigment and it's a little more expensive. There's brands, different brands, but any watercolor for what we're doing will be good. Like I said, as I work, I'll be talking and I want you to hear so you learn a lot as much as you can for the medium. The brush that I just mentioned, round tip, is a brush that is not it's round, meaning the brush comes out of a round set right at the tip there, and as it goes up to the tip, then it gets pointy. So the source of the hairs, comes from a round base, and it ends up being tipped. This is the most common and useful brush because as you paint with it, you can do much more with it. You could press down and make a thick line. You could lift it up and just make a thin line, So it's a very versatile brush. For watercolor, it's always good to have a flat brush. You see how the base of this brush now is flat? It's like a rectangle, but the bottom is flat. And this is very good because the bigger the brush, the more water it can contain, and then you can just wet your paper faster. Okay, so a flat brush is always good to wet your paper and make effects, make designs too. So I'll keep this here, and then this brush is a round tip too, but it's a little thicker, so they go by number. This is a number 5. This may be a number 2, or but you see how it goes into a tip. It's the classic, that when you see a paintbrush of an artist illustrated, you more likely are gonna see the brush that I'm mentioning. And I say that, to remember that if you're gonna purchase a brush, a very high quality brush, would cost money, rather than just what brush should I get as my first brush. Get get this brush, get the point brush, natural hair, and it will be a good investment. And then always have napkins or paper towels close to you. We got watercolor paper, our watercolors, brush, napkins. And then here, for different techniques in watercolor, you have different little tools. Actually, let me get I'm gonna get a little X-Acto knife. I forgot. Which is good to have too. So if you have a little blade, you can have this too. An X-Acto knife or some kind of blade. But these I'm gonna keep here. These are for just techniques, okay, of effects. Effects we're gonna do. And then a crayon. Look, I have a crayon here. We're gonna see why a crayon is important. It's always good to have with you, especially a white crayon. Okay. What we do with the blade is that we scratch and get rid of, like rip off, maybe a little mistake we made, we consider mistake, or we want to scratch the paper afterwards to create like rain, you know, like little rain lines. So you could draw with your blade because you'll be cutting into the paper. Grass, like very thin grass, you know. Artists do have a little blade when they use watercolor. And the crayon is because wherever I mark down on my paper with crayon, ahead of painting, the watercolor would not get in it, right? Because watercolor, water, is not uh, soluble. It doesn't mix with wax, and crayons are made of wax, right? Wax with pigment. So if I make little marks here of white, when I paint over it, the color would not get into those areas. I could use other color crayons, you know, but then the color will show. So if I'm making flowers or any other things, or that I want the color to be in it, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. But we're keeping the white crayon because you could make highlights, or you could fool the viewer thinking that the paper, right, never got wet, never got color, because it's white, just like the paper, the crayon. Okay, and my watercolors are just little cubes that I use, and I put my paints in. You know, you could have your little kit of watercolors, very inexpensive. That's perfectly. I have those too. Let me talk about watercolors in general very quickly before we get into an exercise. As you get your materials, okay? So gather your materials and listen to a little bit of information about watercolor. So watercolor in general, you know, it's a medium, just like acrylic, oil, but it's a very versatile medium because you can also take it with you, okay? It's very easy to take with you, carry, and paint outdoors or wherever you travel with. The paints can stay dry, okay? They can stay dry until wet. You may need only one brush. Water, we can gather water anywhere, right? I could be without water, and then I sit down somewhere and travel and get my water, get a bottle of water or something. You do need the paper, so you know that's key. The paper needs to be able to absorb the water. But just with a brush, and actually this kit came with a little brush that you could you know, fold like this and carry. So I'm wetting it to make it thinner. I only may need this brush, and it goes right here. Close my kit. Then if I had my paper and some type of container, or and I find my water somewhere else, I'm good to go. Okay, so artists use watercolor as a good medium to paint outside or when they travel. Another thing is watercolors, it's great to quickly sketch and use, no mess, easy to clean. Fashion design, architecture, any sketching where you trying to grab an idea and have it color, they're gonna use watercolor, okay? So think of that. And as I paint, I'm gonna talk about the medium and the qualities that it has that we wanna actually emphasize, okay? So when I say qualities that we wanna emphasize is sometimes certain mediums can replicate other mediums, you know, like watercolor. If I use it just as paint that is opaque, meaning paint that is rich, it could replicate acrylic or any other medium of painting because all you see is the color, solid color, right? But watercolor's nature is to be transparent, to be thin, very light. It's a game of the water itself. So we want to emphasize that. That's what I mean by exploring the medium itself. So let's get started. I hope by now you have your materials out and ready. I'm gonna just use the round brush, and I'm gonna take water, clean water, but this is the container I'm gonna eventually use to clean my brush. Right now it's clean water. And I'm just gonna wet an area, not the whole paper. I'm gonna wet an area. And, you know, I'll make sure, I'll mention my email at the end. So if you can write me an email if you have any questions. Write them down right now. If it's something you really need to know, you know. I'm wetting my paper. I cannot see where the water is because the water is clean, right? But if I lift my paper and put it against the light, it's gonna shine and it's gonna show me where the water is, okay? I could wet the paper a lot more, you know, with water dripping and moving, if that's the effect that I want. So this area is wet. Eventually will dry. So understand the nature of what we're doing with watercolor. The brush will always carry water, right? With pigment into certain amounts. I could have a lot of pigment or a little bit of pigment and a lot of more water. But that's the game we're playing. How much water in the brush, how much water in the paper, how much pigment in the brush, right? And what effects can I create? How does the water behave? If you get to understand this and practice, that's what watercolor is all about, okay? I have heard from many, many artists that are hesitant and say watercolor is very difficult. They don't know what to do. They cannot control it. Exactly, that's what they mean. It's not that it's difficult or hard. It's that they don't know what's going to happen. They cannot control it. The control will come from you practicing, okay, and seeing what happens. The more you paint with watercolor, the more confident you'll get, and you'll know what happens when water with color hits our paper. So the paper now in this area is wet. We're gonna call that wet, and my brush is wet, you see? I'm gonna wet my color. I'm gonna choose a color. I'm gonna choose green. So I'm making my color. If I keep messing here with my brush, I'm grabbing a lot of pigment, a lot of more pigment, okay? So I may need a little bit of more water. You see my brush right now is very rich with color, and I know it's wet. So I'm gonna put some dots. So my brush, when your brush is coming in, will always be wet. Doesn't matter how much amount of pigment it has, it will be wet. So this is called wet on wet because the paper is wet. And the color gets kind of like a very dizzy effect, kind of like not even, you know, because the pigment is falling in the water and is trying to find its way through all this water, and it's not even. You see, the color will not be even, and it kind of speckles, it kind of spreads into the paper. I'm gonna draw a line from the wet, you see, to the dry. Look what happens. The wet to the dry. See, when it hit the paper that is dry, it's right here. This is the point where my paper was wet here and my paper is dry here. And I want you to see how the line from this point on became more defined. Okay, and here is blurry. This is wet on wet, this is wet on dry. Okay, so we just did two techniques that are the most famous, common in watercolor. Let me bring this up again. Wet on wet, wet on dry. Okay, so this over here, if I get more green, would look like regular, you know, paint on anything, paper or canvas, or, you know. So But this is over here something you look after in watercolor. A lot of painters, they want this effect. Okay, it's all about, there's no mistakes or right or wrong. It's all about what you want. Okay, and understanding what happens when you do certain things. So now I really like what happened here. And I hope you're doing it with me. You can pause, you can go back, and you can redo this. This sheet of paper, we're gonna fill it up with exercises. If for some reason, as I'm going through the exercises, you feel you wanna explore something, just do it in a corner, in an area, go ahead. That's the whole point of what we're doing. Me talking and talking is for you to also get a better understanding of what we're doing and what watercolor is. I think many demonstrators and artists just skip and say, oh, you know, let's try these 10 techniques of watercolor. This is this, this is that. But they don't really go beyond explaining the basics of why watercolor, why it behaves a certain way, or why would you want to do that? I don't know. So as I talk here, I'm wetting my brush. Another thing to understand is no matter how many times I dip my brush in the water, there's only a certain amount of water my brush can handle. If not, it will, it leaves the rest in there, so this is why you artists get different sizes brushes, because different sizes brushes carry different amount of waters. Actually, there's a very thick brush used to wet the whole paper. I'm going to be talking about why it's so common to wet the entire paper for watercolor artists, because I get that request a lot. But for now, I'm going to wet my brush. I'm going to get my green again, get enough color. You see, I know I have enough color, and this is what I'm going to draw a line. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go and I'm going to make a thick line, and I'm going to lift it up to make a thin line, and now a thick line by pressing down, and I'm going to bring it up to make a thin line, and now a thicker line, and now a thin line by lifting it up. Now a down thicker. But I want you to also see what's happening. Let's try that again without lifting and putting down. Let's make a straight line. Get my water, get my color, and make a line from maybe here, from actually where I started, just as even as I can. And I'm gonna show you why am I doing this. Okay, so many things happen here. As I was doing this, right, down, up, there's less green. There's less green because the pigment, my brush is losing pigment, right? My brush is also losing water, okay? When the brush loses water, because the paper is absorbing it, look at the paper as a sponge that is absorbing when you put down your brush. It's getting all that water and liquid. As I put my brush down, I put the green, and then I start losing water and pigment. And then this is the effect you're gonna get because the surface is texture. Okay, you're gonna get an effect that is like rougher. Look at that. We may want this for certain things in our painting, okay? I believe there's a word called frotis, F-R-O-T-I-S. I believe it's Italian, but it's the effect of painting. And you could do this in acrylic or oil, any painting with a brush. When your brush is dry and you have pigment, but it's dry and you go over, especially texture, canvas or something, you're gonna get this. And it's texture, kind of like rubbing on some texture. And yeah, we may want this, we may want that. You see, it's all about understanding. But if I just go at watercolor, trying to control it, and it's my first try, I'm gonna say that it's a very hard medium. It's difficult. It is not difficult. It's that you need just to do more with it to control it, to be confident. Any medium, you need to be confident. So I think, wet on wet, wet on dry, because the paper is dry here. And then we just explore that. Another thing, as I clean my brush, I'm getting rid of pigment, but my brush is still getting water, okay? Understand this. So it's still wet. So I'm gonna have less green here, you see? Less green here. And if I clean my brush and pull it out with water, even less green. So, I mean, this is just common sense, but just to know, my paper is getting wet of a little bit of green, but it's less as I clean my brush. So if you ever put your brush down and you say, that's too rich, that's too much color, just go ahead and clean it and grab more water. And maybe if you want to spread that color, don't pick up any more pigment and bring more water, okay? But you understand how wet on dry contain its color, because the color cannot go anywhere, because the water that you're putting down is the water that's coming from the brush. On the other hand, if you do wet on wet, once you put that color down on the wet paper, it's just gonna spread, okay? Let me put a few drops of clean water randomly. And kind of spread them, but what I'm doing is I'm putting water down, but it's not all even like here. Okay, it's like these masses of water that the paper is trying to soak in. Understand also that the paper starts taking that water in, but eventually will dry. So there's certain effects you may want to do, and they're time sensitive, because if I wait too long, the paper will dry, okay? If I go too early, maybe the water is still, too new and it's like moving or something. I don't know. Let me clean my brush completely to choose another color. But this is what I was saying, that if you have more brushes, you can just put this down with your green and grab another brush and start with another color. And when I need green, I just go back to my green brush. So the more brush you have, the better. Use them, that's what I'm saying, use them. Okay, so I think it's fairly clean. The napkin or rag or something you have in your hand to clean or anything is very important, because it can collect water from your brush. So if I have too much water, I could get it out of it from my napkin, okay? I could also use my napkin to collect from my paper and use it as a sponge. So this is wet. I can still see the drops. I'm gonna choose blue, so I need to wet my color and not too much. I don't want to grab too much blue, but yeah, I think I have enough. Oops. And when I put it down, it goes where those drops are. You see, not the entire area has the water drops. Some areas are dry, but I did this to show you that when you put the color on the water, the color is going to spread, move around the water, and then try to go to the edges, just like I'll show you in a moment. Maybe it's more clear. This has a lot, but you see how it starts very dark and it's spreading? And the nature of my painting is very organic, because the water is organic. So I didn't have to do this. The water did it on its own. Um, it has a lot of blue, my brush. So I'm not gonna clean it. I'm gonna leave it here. I may use blue again in a moment, but I'm gonna let that dry. If I move it, the brush, you see the color is moving as I move the paper. You see the color moves to the right, the color moves to the left. So you do what you want. There's actually many painters that, you know, I'll tell you why in a moment right now, why they wet the whole paper. But they create, you know, they wet the whole paper, they put a bunch of different colors, they don't really know what they're doing, and they just let it play around with gravity and let it dry for a moment, not too long. And then they look at it. This is what many of them do. They really still don't have an idea of what they're going to do. But then they look at the paper and they start to see things. You know, you may see a swan or a lake or a bird, or you see something in the image, right, with different colors on wet paper. And then they tackle that project based on what they see. And it ends up being a great watercolor painting. Very organic, and you may think, oh my god, that's a beautiful swan, how did you do that? But they didn't know when they started they were going to do a swan. So with that, I mean, be very open-minded. That's a technique artists use. And I'm going to talk now why they wet their entire paper at the beginning. As you can see, my paper is bending more here in this corner because it's more wet right here. And that's okay. The paper may end up being very bended. Sorry about that. My email. Um, okay, the paper may end up being very bended. If when you're done at the end of your painting, is the paper is very bent, all you can do once it's dry, make sure it's completely dry. You put it between books, okay, for a little while, and it just comes back straight as new. Okay, so the reason why, and you know, keep painting and exploring as I talk. The reason why they wet their entire paper as they start, many artists, what they do is they have a board, not on their table, right? They have a board, a wooden board or something, and they tape their paper. Okay, they tape their paper down to contain it so it bend less. And when they use a lot of paper, when they use a lot of water, they even staple it. They staple the paper down to really control that. Then they wet the paper. Now, I want you to understand this. That's a choice. Many watercolor artists begin doing that. So if you see that practice done a lot, just understand that it's because then, like I said, they put color down. They they may know what they're going to do. Obviously, they put their color down, and they get this effect. They want watercolor, okay? They may not want from the start this that looks like regular acrylic painting. They want the effect of transparency and what watercolor actually looks like when water reacts to the paper. Okay, so they get that effect in their entire work. They wait a little to let it dry, and then they tackle anything that is, like I just mentioned, a little more dry or things like that. So the nature of wetting the entire paper is to just tackle watercolor in a sense. As watercolor, it's understand to be, okay? Like I said earlier, to emphasize the nature of what watercolor means. Does that make sense? And then they get this, like, you can look it up, Google it. They get this city on the rain, and the city, yeah, the city is very detailed afterwards on dry, but the first sky and ground is all very wet on wet, and it's raining. So that's why they wet the whole paper, just to get that big foundation for their work. You see a lot of watercolors. Let me do a little bit of the crayon. I'm gonna do the little marks of the crayon here as I talk. They do their watercolors about underwater or city life during the rain. You see how water is always related. They may do Venice. You know, Venice is a city that's in water. So a lot of Venice watercolors. They make the foggy forests, foggy mornings. But you get in the understanding that watercolor is often used to recreate an effect of, you know, mist or water or something related to an overall sense of wet, okay, or underwater, or, you know. But if you Google watercolors, more likely the city is going to be raining or things like that. And then you're going to see paintings that are just look like acrylic painting, like I said, because they're not exploring watercolor in this sense. So I put a bunch of little white marks with my crayon. We all agree already that wax does not mix with water. So my water should not mix where I put my crayon. And then if I put blue, I'm gonna grab water because I know I'm gonna need it. You see how it's not mixing where I put my crayon? And I know my brush was carrying a lot of blue, so I'm gonna clean it a little and grab more water to spread the blue that I already have in the paper. Look, I'm just spreading what I already put down on the paper. So this is a good thing for you to understand. I mean, you could go always and keep grabbing blue, but if you see that what you place down on the paper is already enough pigment and you have a bigger area to cover, then go ahead and grab water. Don't grab more pigment because you know what you have on the paper is enough. So this shows me where I put my marks. There's another medium, another material you can purchase. I think I have some somewhere. Let me, I don't have it accessible right here with me, but it is like a whiteout. Okay, it's like a little gummy liquid material that you put down, just like I put down my crayon. Imagine I put down that material here. I paint, but guess what? Not like the crayon, who's gonna have to stay there. That material can be pulled out. So then I go back and I rub off that rubbery, gummy material that I put, and then my paper is exposed. So then I can go back with color and paint over it. Right now I cannot paint over my crayon. So what I did white is gonna stay white. It's okay. But you understand how there's an answer for everything. There's a material you can, once you get this, you can peel it out and go back into the paper because now it will be exposed. But yeah, cool. I'm gonna try one more, let's see, one more wet on wet with different colors. So you see how they could get mixed. But you see how this could look like water, highlights, shining, you know, on the ocean or something. Or even I could have drawn clouds. I could have drawn a cloud in the sky, you know. I could have drawn clouds, and you see these are two clouds. If you get little dots like that, that's fine. That's the water. That's the water on top of the crayon not getting mixed. Just wait, it will dry it out. Where's my tissue or rag that I was using? Yep, here to clean my brush. I could clean it a little. This is not it. Yeah, I'm gonna use this, but okay. One more practice of wet on wet. And then I'll do this scratching of the little blade. And we will explore one painting. Okay, let me show you another blade. This is a box cutter. The really cool thing about this box cutter, I have shown you earlier, is that you could change the blade also. Is the regular, classic blade. They sell this very inexpensive. As the blade becomes dull, just be careful with it. But this is a very inexpensive box cutter that you can protect like that and push in when you need it. Okay. All right. So wet on wet. I'm gonna grab my flat brush because I want to wet a bigger area. You see, let me see if it's in the shot. Yep. So right now, I'm gonna wet this area. I don't want to grab the dirty water. I want to use clean water. So this is why we try to keep 2 containers of water, and one of them we try to keep as clean as possible. So this brush, it still has green. I can quickly come back and get rid of that as soon as possible. It still shows a little bit. So this brush wasn't cleaned properly. That's a good example to show you to clean your brush very, very well, especially when you finish, when you're done, because otherwise you only will have to check, and the only way to check is putting the brush down with water. I'm gonna go in the clean water just to check that my brush is really clean. And now I'm gonna go back with my clean water. This time, you see, I'm just wetting the paper, wearing a big area. Actually, we have more time to explore the medium. Let me lift my paper to see where is my wet water. Okay, it's very wet. Yep, this is good. Okay. Maybe more. So you decide how much. This is a lot of, but I want it to be really, really wet because I want the effect to be very clear and obvious. So this whole area here is very wet, as you can see when you lift your paper against the light. And my water is, as I lift it to the right, look, it's accumulating here. So I'm gonna go back and move it to the, just be aware of your water moving if it's very wet on your paper. Okay, that area is wet. I'm gonna put some blue. Maybe some dots here or star. You see how it kind of crystallizes? It's kind of like a snowflake. But now I'm gonna clean my brush quickly. I'm gonna get another color. Maybe some orange. And wherever there's a lot of more color, it's gonna behave like that. You see, it's accumulating here. I can see the water gathering there. So I'm gonna move it to the other side and mix it. You could do whatever you want, but the water won't leave this area because that's where the paper being wet ends. So look how I just changed my painting by moving my paper from side to side. And this is what I was telling you, the color accumulates at the edges. Did I mention that before? Because it wants to leave that area. And the wet paper doesn't allow the color to go beyond where the water is wet. So where the paper is wet. Okay? So I put a lot of water and I'm going around to define the outline with my blue because there's a lot of blue. But I could also put orange if I want over here maybe. And bring, but you get the effect. You see that? So imagine if I do this with a whole sheet of paper, big, and different colors, and then I see a castle in the clouds. And then I made my painting a castle in the clouds. So again, think about that. That's a technique used by many famous artists. And then your castle in the sky will be an amazing work that seems to be random at the beginning as a foundation, but you really didn't know you were gonna do that from the start. So there you go with that. I'm going to now take my blade, whichever blade, and maybe scratch some of the blue here. The paper is gonna rip. I'm actually getting rid of the paper. You see, it's cutting into the paper. But it will, if I make lines down like this, like long lines, it could look like rain. It could look like it's raining. Don't be afraid. Let me bring it closer, but you know, I made long lines, but if I had made just little short ones, just a little tiny short one, it makes that effect of some are short, some are long, and it does look like it's raining. You see that right there? And it's okay if the paper looks ripped. Okay, if you make a mistake or you know, don't be afraid to rip it this way. It's the way you kind of erase what we consider big mistakes. You know, you may erase them by scratching like that. Here's a close-up of this area, which is still wet. You see the water moving? It's still wet. So I'm gonna take my rack to show you how I can collect some of this and create maybe clouds or whiten my paper, because my napkin or my paper towel or my sponge will work as a, sorry, yeah, it will work as a sponge. That's what I was trying to say. So I could take my rack here, and if I go like this, you see, I'm collecting, if it's like if it was a sponge, I'm collecting the paint, and I could draw clouds. I'm gonna just collect a lot of this because it's very wet and I don't want this to take too long to dry. Because it would take forever for that to dry. But you see how I collected some of that? Let me collect more. Let me create more clouds. You could even use, you know, your finger. The thing is, your finger doesn't absorb, so it's gonna leave the color still there. You see how there's clouds here? From far away looks better. That's the other thing when you paint watercolor. Think organically, okay? Because if we think, oh, let me draw, you could do it too. Fine. But you're going to, by default, try to draw and paint like wet on dry. Because we're so used to do things that way since even little at a coloring book, right? Follow the outline, do all this. But with watercolor, I want you to think organically, kind of like just the generic sense of the form you're doing, just like here, the highlights. I'm not defining where the water is yet or things like that. And that leaves the viewer more freedom. And that's actually what the Impressionists did in the late 1800s, right? They caught an impression of what they saw. And that's why their paintings are told to look better farther away, because they're letting you as the viewer complete the picture. This could be clouds, this could be rain, without having to, define every drop of water, if you're getting what I'm saying, and define the outline of the person and his jacket and his shoes. So what they do is they just, for the shoes, may do a little dot and it works. Okay. Let me paint here. I hope you're feeling your sheet of water too. I'm gonna demonstrate what I just said. Okay, painting two, let's see. Painting two trees, or small trees or people. And you hopefully grab that idea. Okay, because it's very important to be able to get the effect of watercolor. And then the next hour, we have a whole hour, we're going to paint a painting, and I'm going to go step by step so you can follow me. So let's see our tree. What I was just saying, and by the way, you could always use a pencil to sketch what you're going to paint in watercolor. Artists do this, John C. George Sargent, everybody did this. If you go into a museum, you're gonna see the outline or the pencil of the drawing that's under, right? And it doesn't matter if they didn't erase it. That's just how it is. It's fine. That's the artwork. You don't have to erase every single thing. Oh, there's a line here, like, on that note about museums and watercolors, go to the MFA right now. You're not gonna see watercolors, okay? So unless the show is about watercolors, temporary show. So what happened with watercolors and museums, unfortunately, is that watercolors are very sensitive to light, and they cannot be shown for too long. So museums don't usually, in permanent exhibitions, have watercolors, if any at all. So if there's a Sargent show on watercolors, run to go see it, visit a few times like I did. This was maybe 5 years ago. A few years ago, there was a show, an exhibition about his watercolors. So I went many, many times, and it was amazing. But I knew they kept those, they weren't going to be there for too long, because, again, they can be outside in the light like that. Galleries, right, showing artists' work may have watercolors. You could go see them. Galleries are trying to sell the artwork. But then if you acquire one, don't expose them to bright light, sunlight, keep them in a dim room. The other thing is the nature of the watercolor is that you will never experience it as best as in person. Okay, right now, even on this video, you cannot see the colors as I'm looking at them or in a picture. So same thing with your painting. Just take a picture of it and then put your camera when it's done next to it, and you see how different it is. And this is because watercolor works by like any medium or thing reflecting the light, but there's so much transparency, okay? And the paper is playing through too, okay? The paper is key. The paper right here, where it's very light, this green, this is passing through the paint, okay? So in a photograph, I cannot get the paper effect. The photograph is just gonna grab this color as a solid. So that's unfortunate, something, you know, that if you want to enjoy and appreciate a work of art made in watercolor, you're gonna have to see it in person. All right. Let me do my tree. I'm gonna sketch it quickly. And again, I'm not bothered by having to erase this later. Doesn't matter. That's not how watercolor works. You're gonna leave your pencil down. And for this reason, you're gonna draw lightly. Okay? You're gonna draw lightly. You're not gonna press the pencil down too much. I'm gonna try to keep the trees similar because what I'm trying to show you is two different ways of painting the tree. This is like a, you know, a normal small tree. Okay. In one, I'm gonna paint it with watercolor as what I'm saying. You see my paper is starting to bend a lot, which is okay. But if I tape it down, I control it a little better. But what I mean by painting it as if I was painting with acrylic or coloring with, you know, crayons or whatever, it's just opaque paint on dry paper. And my tree, you know, could become lighter or darker. But I'm defining my work very, very much. And putting a lot of detail, maybe perhaps with the different tips. This is very random, so what I did, you could barely see the drawing, but it's just kind of like it's not even a circle because it's not entirely round, but it's very edgy, and then I put down a trunk for the tree trunk. And if it's not too edgy and it's too round for you, then you see how I'm going in with my brush. Going in meaning like out to then make it edgy, like if this were leaves or branches. I'm taking different amounts of green because if I put more green here, the difference of tonalities on green bring depth. Look how quickly, I mean, this is amazing. With watercolor, how quickly you can do this game. With any other medium, you would have to grab another color, you know? Here, I could just get this effect just with the water, everybody, okay? So I understand I may leave some gaps of white between all this, as in a tree, it's not solid, you know, there may be gaps of background behind, but I'm pulling out like if these were leaves. And I'm grabbing more green in some areas to make it darker, like right now. And I may even go back and make it even darker. The center, don't leave white areas in the center because that's where most of the tree is. I mean, leaves. It's looking very round to me. So I'm gonna have to maybe broaden it into the sides here. Okay. Make it like more like an umbrella. But these are just different types of trees. You know, there's trees that are very round, and that's okay. I just visually want to make sure we recognize this as a, like the classic tree, right? I think I'm happy. Maybe some green here that is isolated from a branch. I'm gonna grab the darker, I'm gonna grab the same green. It's just a lot of solid pigment to do what I just told you I was going to do, which is to make the center darker and spread it out. So what this does, it makes us see volumes in the, this may be more close to us than that back there, you know. This is just an effect because of the darkness of the green. So I just went very quickly and random, and look how it looks. Okay, but even as I was being random, I was still being very definite about where the outline is, okay? And where the solid green is, which is in this entire body, right? And then I'm just gonna quickly grab lightly meaning there's gonna have a lot of more water. You see, more water because I'm playing it safe. More water. With more water, I made a very light trunk. Now, if I decide to make it darker in some areas, I can go back here and pick my brown again. More pigment, less water. I'm cleaning the water, grabbing more pigment. Does that make sense? There's already brown here because I put it very lightly because I was playing it safe. But now I can go back and maybe make one side darker than the other. Okay, make some of the branches up here. I don't know. You see, I chose where to then put the darker brown. I know. And it looks more like a tree. So look how strong is the nature of a watercolor, where what I'm trying to teach you here is how watercolor could be used to be more defined, meaning this is my leaves, this is my trunk, you know, this is my shadow, this is where, you know, and this is what I'm telling you that you could do fine, perfect, great. But you could even be more suggestive and organic. So even as I was trying to show, to be definite, watercolor doesn't really kind of let me in a way, if that makes sense. So watercolor by nature, look, tries to make me make all this shadow of the trunk and be suggestive, even if I'm trying to be very clear about it. So as a painter, right, you're just pushed to be more intuitive is what I mean. And watercolor is very extremely intuitive, okay? So embrace that is what I mean. Okay, I'm gonna do another tree here. And for this one, let me clean my brush. This brush, I know is very clean because it never touched color. I just use it to wet the paper, remember? So if I'm wetting the paper, it's gonna be very, hopefully, more loose, more intuitive. Now I still have my green here. I don't need to clean my brush because I just used two colors. Brown is here, green is here. And by the way, that intuitive aspect of the watercolor just makes you work faster, everybody, okay? Which is something you want too. Think about it. I just want to grab an impression. You need to be quick, and watercolor allows you that. This is why when you color sketches in like I mentioned, what did I say? Architecture, fashion design. A fashion design is like, oh, I'm thinking of this dress. Oh, what is the color gonna be? And they just, rather than even markers, they just quickly use watercolor. Look how quick I just did my tree. And that's what you want. When you sketch out of, let's say, a live person moving, dancing, or live figure taking poses, you just have a certain amount of time, maybe 2 minutes, 1 minute, 5 minutes if you choose. So in those 2 minutes, you want to capture as much as you can, and you are going to use watercolor. Okay, so that's my tree right there. This is it. I did it maybe in 1/6 of the time spent here, and the trunk is gonna be very quick too. This is already wet, that area. This area is already wet, the trunk, okay? I could go back and put more green, just like in this one, okay? This doesn't stop me. But look how, I know, look how a little more organic is this tree. And from far away, if I put this very, very far down, you could probably make out this tree just like this one, the same way, because our eyes cannot capture all these details. The artist will give us enough information to see the tree as he wants us to see it. Does this make sense? I used some of the green to make the dark side of the branches. Did you notice that? So that's something you could do. Ideally, you know, you don't want to mix colors like that. But in the quickness of you working, you may mix colors to make colors that are darker or things like that. I really, really love what's happening up here. Look, you see this first green against the, that is wet against the dry paper. Create that edge that's very defined. I like this tree more than I would like this tree, is what I'm trying to say. I mean, they're both, you know, you could paint whichever way you want. I think the light is getting on the way of that effect, but you know, you could paint whichever way you want. I think my point is that as you paint more watercolor, you're gonna get more experience, and as you get more experience and more confident, eventually you'll appreciate and would like to work this way. Faster, concise, intuitive, organic. Okay? Let's get ready the other piece of paper to do our painting. As we are gonna do that, I'm gonna quickly clean my brushes. A brush could last you today, right? If I was using acrylic especially and I let it dry, I ruin my brush and it only lasts me one day. Or I could take care of it and clean it and be gentle and care for it, and literally will last me my lifetime. So that's a good thing to remember, that a brush can last you one day or the rest of your life, depending how you care for it. So I wet this paper here, and I'm gonna make some, I know I'm gonna finalize here with making some petals of a flower. This is another thing that I've been talking about that watercolor does. Let's count the petals. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3. I want the same amount. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This was very, very wet, so that's why my petals are very spreading everywhere, which I wasn't really thinking I wanted that, but what can I do? The water is very wet. I can't control this right here. But yeah, I just wanted to show you two different approaches. I need a lot of getting my pigment. Okay. You see how this flower here, and again, this is not a good example here to my right because the paper is very, very wet. I shouldn't have let it be this wet. But what can we do? It's still wet, but I'm trying to make it less wet to be able to define this petal a little more. But my point here is I make the same type of flower. Okay, and I know as messy as the one in the right looks, this one, if I had a background, let's say, I don't know, purple background or whatever around it, around both of them, I kind of more likely will like the one to the right, to be honest. It will make me feel like it's a little more organic again. Background, I mean this. Let me dirty this brush with some purple. Because when I put the background now, it's random too, so I may not get in every single corner, and that's okay. Okay. But if I had more flowers, we're gonna do them actually next. Why don't we paint flowers for our next painting? This randomness, some of them will be looking to the right, some will be looking to the left. In here, if I want to do that effect of looking to the right, looking to the left, looking up with a bunch of flowers, I have to be very definite. I have to really define that. Here, it leaves me more freedom to organically make that effect. So I'm more prone to like the water effect watercolor causes. Great, so let me clean my brushes. We're gonna get another sheet of paper, a brand new sheet of paper. Maybe I'll, in 1 minute, actually in one moment, I'm gonna get another cup of clean water here, in this here. Just a few seconds to get clean water, so I'm gonna put this away. And I'm gonna get another container in which I'm gonna pour clean water. Okay, so yeah, email me if you feel like it. My email is the number one letter STUDIOMENDEZ at Gmail. So Juan Studio Mendez at Gmail. What tree would you like best? If you were to paint or look at this at a painting, would you like the one to the right or would you like the one to the left? Again, even this one, I gotta say, has a little bit of what I was pointing out here. Okay, but you get the idea. I was trying to here do something more defined, and it still has some organic elements, just like this flower is more defined. Okay, great. So brushes, I hope they're clean enough. Yep. Paints, waters, new paper, actually so get your new paper, all your materials are ready. Because we're going to do a new painting. All right, so everybody got their materials? One thing I want to show you is when you're using your paper, okay? This is very important. You don't have to use the entire sheet of paper, okay? What I mean by that, especially with watercolor paper, since we know it's very expensive, and not because it's expensive, it's also what I'm gonna say next. You may not need to always paint on this large scale of size that we just did. Okay, we just did this. You may want to paint something that is half this size. Something this size. Half the page. Okay, maybe you want to do half of this, half of half. And it's like a postcard, and you can mail it. You can mail it because the thickness of the paper is kind of like a cardstock. That's the beauty of watercolors too. You can make cards, put it on an envelope. Anyway, yeah, so just be aware of your paper where you're doing your things. This sheet of paper that we just did, I hope you fill it out with different practices, exercises, okay? So keep doing exercises. I have a long sheet of paper that I'm gonna have to cut for for the painting we're going to do. We have time. We have more than half hour left. But I wanted to show you before I move on a couple of things. And I have said this before. I'm repeating myself in this video with things I have spoken in our classes, our live classes. But new students that watch this video, or if you want to, as you watch again, repetition is good for you to learn. One thing to do with your watercolors right here to my right is to take them, each color, okay? And take a piece of paper, or if you have enough space, and look what I did here. I'm taking each color, okay? I'm taking each color and putting it down on my paper. I have my two greens, my two blues, sorry, my brown, my red. Let's do my yellow, and I'll explain you what I'm doing. what I'm basically doing is putting the pure color here. It's obviously still wet because I need water to get my color out of there. So, and then I'm spreading it with wet water in the transparency. And I'm doing this in the paper because it's not the same to see the color on your palette as to see it on your paper. Okay, so this, once you're done, this here, you can tape it on a wall close to your art working space, and you use it as a reference. Okay, you use it to see how does that color actually looks, and once you put it down on your paper. Does that make sense? Sometimes the box won't, says, oh, this is yellow, or but that's not how it's actually gonna look like. We have grabbed at some point a marker in our lives where it looks green, and you say, yes, that's green, I want that color. And when we're using it, it's a funny green, it's maybe a little more yellowish or something. So a good thing is to then, in that case, take all your markers, and start making lines of each one of them. And the next time you're gonna work with markers, which is my point, you're gonna refer to this sheet to know how that color actually looks on paper. So I put the real solid yellow here, okay? I still have pigment on my brush and it's still wet. I'm gonna wet it. See how it's losing some of the pigment? And I'm gonna draw, I'm not gonna touch the square, I'm gonna put it very close, and I'm gonna draw a line here that's gonna go like this. This was pretty even. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clean my brush and go at it again. So what happens when I clean my brush is the next time I put my brush down, even if it's wet, this is what I want us to understand about watercolor, how it behaves. As I clean my brush, it's wet, but it has no pigment as much as before. Then when I put it down here, it's gonna collect the pigment, okay? So let me try to do that, collect some of the water, get rid of some of the water, and then from here, I'm gonna collect some of this yellow. You see how it's picking up the yellow? I'm doing this by eye. I'm gonna collect a little more here. Maybe go backwards. And then here, I'm gonna touch it. I'm gonna touch this here and spread this yellow. I think I'm happy. I'm gonna clean again. Clean, 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 clean. And push back. Maybe collect some of this yellow here and push back. Push back and mix in. I like it. It's still wet though. It's still very wet. And every time I put the brush, there you go. I think I like this now. So that's my yellow, and I'll do the rest of the colors, you see? So try to do this with your colors, and then when you're done, as I mentioned, use it as a reference. So look how big this watercolor paper I have is here. Look, it's huge. You see this? So I'm gonna cut it in a few pieces because I ran out of my other size. But that's a lesson you should take from your materials. Just because you get a paper that is 11 by 14, you don't have to use 11 by 14. You could use 11 by 7, you know? And your time too, because the larger you work, the more time it's gonna take you, okay? So be realistic and honest to yourself. Is this gonna take me a long time? You know, is this gonna be okay? Is this gonna be enough? So I got this size or this size, which is a little bigger of even what we had. So I'm gonna put this down here. Actually, it could be exact. It could be the same size, which is kind of like a 9 by 12, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see what this is. 9 by 12. I was correct. 9 by 12. So the sheet that I have was 12 by 24. Sorry, no, 12 by 18. That's a common size. 12 by 18. All right, let's get started. We have half hour exactly to do our painting. Let me get another clean water container. And we're gonna paint some flowers. We're gonna paint a field of flowers. You choose where you want to do the effect of wet on wet, if you want the entire paper or just half of it. I always encounter that the sky, especially the sky, if you're gonna do a big sky, if the sky has things like, you know, if there's trees that are covering the sky, then that's different. But if you see a lot of the sky, there's a big lake or, you know, a reflection, artists tend to wet the paper, like I said earlier, okay? Wherever there's reflection, the city is raining and the sidewalks look like a mirror to the sky because it's wet and it's raining, then they wet the entire paper. Venice, like I said, Venice, the water is down here and the sky is up here reflecting, so they wet the entire paper and then they put the buildings on the sides. So my painting is gonna have a big chunk of the sky. It's gonna be shown. We're gonna play around with the effects we learn about the clouds and things like that. So I'm gonna wet my paper half or a little bit more than half for my sky. Before I do that, I wanna share with you that as you keep painting and do watercolors and you get really into it, there's other materials you may want to acquire. So one thing is like a little water bottle, maybe of cosmetics that you are recycling. So this is water. I put water in it. I bought this already with the purpose of this, so I bought this, but I'm sure you can find something at home maybe that looks like this and you could use it for your water. If I spray my watercolors or my paper, I could save time, create effects. Just something handy to have with you. And then the other container and bottle I didn't want to use until I show you is a wash bottle. This is called a wash bottle. Okay, if I dropped it, it's not gonna spill. It's called wash bottle because of this hook here to clean things and wash them. The cool thing is you can decide how much water is gonna come out of the tip. Maybe a little drop, okay? Maybe you're refilling this. So this has come to me very, very handy in choosing how much water I am putting. Especially to get my paintings going, you have to wet them. You know, so I wet them a little bit with this without having an excess. Or I could spray them and keep them wet. So we're ready. All right, so my flat brush is gonna wet with clean water. You see my brush is not entirely clean. So let me clean it. I'm not doing a great example or I'm getting full. If I have gone like this, oop, in my clean water, I would have seen that brush wasn't clean. So that's something good to do before. Press down, not just wet it, but press down, and then you get the pigment out of the brush. Let's see. Now it's good. I'm going to take half of my paper from top to bottom. Half is here. And wet this whole top half. As you wet it, be careful not to saturate it too much. So as I'm saturating a lot, I realize some areas are very wet, so then I just spread that water. If you need to go a little lower because it's too much water, go ahead. A good way to know where's your water is to lift it up into the light, and it will give you reflection. This paper is sucking the water really quick, that's why. So I can tell the paper is really acting fast. That may happen to you. By the way, it's very important to have the right paper. If you do not have watercolor, I apologize. Don't even try doing what we're doing. It will not work. Your regular print paper is gonna rip, okay? It's just not gonna take on the amount of water we need it to take, okay? This will only work with watercolor paper, all right? I keep going back and wetting because my paper is sucking the water and it looks like it's dry. So just be aware that once you put water, it may disappear because the paper is taking it in. You may have to go back on top of that, okay? I think I'm happy. I'm gonna go with my blue. Okay, I'm gonna use, you may not have a flat brush, so I'm not gonna use mine. I'm gonna use my round brush. And if I need more water to make the effect, I will grab it. Meaning this. I'm gonna grab water, I'm gonna put down my blue. Actually, I don't want that blue. I want the other blue. Sorry. I don't want ultramarine blue. I want cerulean blue for my sky. You could use any blue you want, but I want this one here. So I put it down, you see? And as I'm spreading it, I may need more water rather than pigment. You may need that. You may need more water than pigment. Then go ahead and put down more water. It's hard to do this with the round brush because it's such a big area and you're trying to be even. You know what I mean? But because it's wet on wet, something I want you to keep in mind, you see I'm going back and forward with my water because I need it to be kept wet, is to keep in mind to go from left to right or right to left. Keep it horizontal because the sky is gonna be horizontal. Okay, you see how it's absorbing all that color? It's incredible. Your paper is gonna get really bended. Your paper is gonna get really bended because this is extremely wet. But the fact that you went left to right looks more like the horizon. It looks more like the sky. Okay, do not worry. If for some reason you put a lot of blue down in one spot like that, just Don't grab more pigment, spread it, grab more water to keep spreading it. And let your intuition work wonders, okay? Trust yourself. My edges are not working that well here on the paper because I did not wet them as I was telling you to. So I think I'm happy. It's still wet. Maybe some darker blue up here because the sky, as it goes higher, may get a little darker, you know, just like when we look outside. I mean, I could play that aspect more clearly, but I'm not. But the cool thing about going left to right is that some lines are going to be lighter, some gaps, but the gaps are kept horizontal. So you see, this is lighter here, but it's lighter as a horizontal line, just like it happens in nature. So I'm happy with this. It's still wet. I'm just lifting my paper so I could wipe my table excess of blue at the ends. I don't want it to get dry too quickly without making my clouds on my paper, because if it's dry it won't work. So I'm going to collect my rag, and these clouds are not gonna be that white, but because there's still blue under them. But you see how I'm creating even. This is already dry. I cannot even do them. Look, it's already. The paper just works so fast that my clouds. Here works. I think I'm good. I think I'm happy with this guy. All right. I think I'm happy. You know, something we could have done was to make a little circle in white earlier, before everything, for, you know, like the moon during the daytime. We could have had the moon during the daytime right there. Okay. But I cannot do that now. So I don't know if as it's getting dry, I am happy with what I did. If you're not happy with what you did, go back, you know, put more blue, or let's see. Oh, that wasn't the blue that I wanted. Go back, add more blue so you could basically, by putting the blue, you're wetting the paper, so then you can get more clouds out. You see how I'm getting my clouds here now, but it's just because I went back and wet the paper. Now I might not get the clouds as I wish because there's still color under all this because it was dry already. There was some of it that was dried already. Okay. That's okay. You see, because I added that extra blue, kind of looks like a bulb of blue added. So just be careful. Look, just be careful. Just be careful with the amount of blue or amount of pigment you're using. You know, spread it out. Be conscious of your work. Work overall. Don't get focused on one little corner. You know, work with the entire piece at once. Okay. Let's see. My field of flowers. We've done a field of flowers before. I was gonna do more defined flowers, so this is what we're gonna do. I'm gonna do the field of flowers, and I'm gonna do both. I'm gonna define my flowers in the front, and I'm gonna do my field of flowers in the back that we've done before. And then that way, students that have not done the field of flowers, they can experience that too. What I mean by field of flowers is, look, these look like flowers because, right, they just crayon marks that are red that did not mix with the green. This is a very easy painting, kind of similar to what we're doing and we're gonna do. But I'm gonna make sure that this in the front are closer to us so they're more defined. So it's gonna look even more three-dimensional. Here we're looking far away, even up here. Okay, let's do that. We have some time. So I'm gonna start with my flowers. Choose the color of your flowers. You know, if you want green or orange, or I'm gonna choose orange. And I'm going to back here make dots. I'm gonna do half of this up, not the bottom, because the bottom is gonna have the very defined flowers. But from here, look, from here, up is gonna be a bunch of dots. Again, if you had cut your paper smaller than mine, your work is gonna be, you know, a little faster because you have less space. So be conscious of the size of the work you're working on. I think I've chosen a very big piece of paper, that's fine. As you go up, keep those dots closer because that will represent that they're farther away. I'm making bunch of dots. You see? And I'll show you how they're all gonna be. These are here more spread out. But as they go far up, it's real closer because it means those dots, which represent flowers, are farther away. And by being farther away, that means they are closer, right? They're more condensed. Okay. They go so far away, check this out, that I'm going to draw some lines. And those lines in crayon, even though they're lines, they represent masses of flowers that are so close that they look like a line. Okay, I'm gonna do that right now, look. Since our paper is texture, these lines that are not, I'm not making a whole long line. I'm gonna make it short lines. But those short lines represent like a bunch group of flowers in the back. You see, that's a little effect that you're learning now. So since my flowers are orange, I'm gonna make some very defined in the front. You know, I'm kind of glad I'm repeating this, so you could do this again, get the hangs on, I know. The next video project is gonna be entirely different. But for those of you who've never done this, you can do it with us, okay? So let me clean my brush, which doesn't seem to want to clean. There you go. For my orange flowers, which I'm gonna define. And I'll tell you why I'm doing my flowers before my field and grass. Actually, let me wet the paper. Not too much, okay? Not too much. So I'm not gonna take too much water. I'm not gonna wet my paper too drastically, but it's gonna be wet. but not too much. Okay, so I don't want it to be too much, but I want it to be wet. Because remember that flower that was very wet? I'm gonna make flowers that are organic, but not too crazy. And I wanna make them quick. Look at that. And I wanna make them on different sizes. Look how quick I'm doing my flowers. Even like a cross. That's too wet maybe. But you know, as I'm working here, I know this is getting dry. Whatever I did here is getting dry, so it'll be wet, but not extremely wet. And I'm even making like X marks. Even I'm getting on those circles, sorry. So this is an addition to what we've done before. And some of them, look, I want to make them bigger, very big enough that are closer to us. And I'm leaving the center because in a moment I'm gonna do the little center of our flower. But they're all different sizes. You know, some of them are very big. You see how quickly we get this painting done. This I may have to go in and clear this spot right here. Let's see. So this is an addition to, sorry, I was saying it's an addition to those of you who work on the project earlier. You did not get to paint these flowers that were closer to us. Again, some can be on the side. So to make the side, rather than a star like that, look, I'm gonna do like a line like this, and then do the petals just coming from one side. You see, so that this one is facing to the right, this one is facing to the left. You see that? Different sizes. Maybe one that's really big in front of us. I mean, I could do a field with the sky and pine trees, kind of like a little Bob Ross, very quickly painting. In watercolor, that would be very fast to accomplish because you get those, you get the sky, you get the lake, you get the mountains done in very quick movements of color. But as quick as I'm doing this, the reason I want to teach you to paint like this is to, what I said, to work organically, to not worry. There's less mistakes than what we think. Yes, there are mistakes in paintings because we get results that we may not want, and we call them mistakes. You could fix those. But overall, if you work like this, you're a little more less hesitant and worry. Okay, which is what I want you to do, and you're less confined to have to rendering every detail of what you're doing. We need bigger flowers, just like these ones that were. I'm gonna make this one here bigger, maybe one bigger here. So you see how, as there's bigger here, I need to replicate that and balance what is happening. Okay. So that's something else that we're going to, as we learn. That's a little more about composition, balancing things. Let me make these flowers bigger. And composition has a lot to do with sometimes repetition, but more than repetition, balance. And there's different ways to create balance. Okay, sizes, color, volume. So if it's based on color, if I put a color here to balance it out, I need to put it somewhere else on this side. That's what I mean. If it's by size, something big here could be balanced by two things or three that are smaller, or something the same size. If it's based on size, it could be based in different things. Doesn't have to be, you know. We're gonna learn about all that, but I think I'm happy with this field here. I do have to wait for this to dry, but as it's drying, I'm gonna come back here and outline my sky, my horizon, which are gonna be lower mountains. And when I do this, remember, we're doing it wet on dry, because this area is gonna be dry, not like our sky. And because it's dry and I'm tackling my mountains first, this is things that I already know are gonna happen. This is what I want you to get confident about watercolor, of what you decide to do, how you're gonna do it, and you're sure more likely it will happen because you know how water behaves. So since this is dry, and I'm gonna keep my paint, what I'm gonna paint wet on dry. You see, I could wet it if I want to, but I don't want to for what I'm going to do. So I'm gonna wet my brush, get my green for the mountains, wet on dry, and as I go straight first here, the outline is gonna be dark of my mountains because the color is gonna reach that edge. Okay, watch. Get my color, green. It's gonna be wet on dry paper. And as I go in, you see how I'm pushing the color to the edge of my mountain to outline it? If that's not happening for some reason, then I push, then I get more and push it there. So I'm getting a very clear outline because that's what I wish to do. I'm getting it at the bottom too, but you'll see what what I'm gonna do with that bottom as it's wet. Okay, so I'm getting it everywhere because it's wet on dry. I'm gonna get it at the top and at the bottom. You see, the paint is behaving as when you paint with acrylic or regular paint. But you'll see what's gonna happen to this bottom part in a moment. As I add water to that bottom, what's gonna happen? It's gonna have less pigment. The green is gonna spread. Okay, the green is gonna spread, and then it's gonna be lighter by spreading because I have less pigment. Does that make sense? So I'm not gonna grab green anymore, and I'm gonna go in with my green in here. Since this is crayon, it's not gonna mix with my flowers that are in orange. Before I do that, I have to do the center of my flowers, which are going to be in yellow. Okay, something to remember about watercolor is you work from light to dark, meaning your darker colors are gonna be the last ones. I'm gonna do random yellow dots here and there because as I'm teaching you how to embrace randomness, why not? I'm putting the center of my flowers yellow, but then I'm doing a few drops of yellow randomly in different spots, representing, I don't know, the center of some flowers, maybe something that's on the field. Doesn't really matter because it's just an effect. But when I do my green, I'm gonna try to go around that yellow, is what I mean, okay? It's very important for you to remember this. Work from light to dark, meaning if you put a color dark at the beginning, you won't be able to go back on top of it, okay? Watercolor works on transparency, so you will not be able to put lighter colors on top of the dark. So if as you see your picture, oh, that boat over there is really dark, then just save it to the end. Just paint it at the end. Paint everything else. Paint everything that is light and bright, and save that person or that boat or that house that is casting a dark shadow for the end. And if you need to go over something that was bright, that's okay. But the other way around, it won't be possible. Okay, if you cast that shadow first dark, you won't be able to put in on top of it something lighter. But if I put something lighter in my ground and I'm casting my shadow, and I want to leave room for that light, then as I cast my shadow dark at the end, I leave that little room. You see, that makes sense? So I'm gonna grab now water, okay? This is still wet. I can see it. I almost waited too long, not too long. And I'm spreading this green. You see how I know I almost waited too long? Because that line is starting to define at the bottom. But with water, I just erased it. Look. Okay, I may want to grab some more green at this point. But you see how I am erasing the bottom of my mountains. That was very edgy, and outline it. So now I'm spreading with water the green of the field. And this is now getting mixed with my crayon. Now as I'm getting here, I gotta be careful. I see the yellow already that is still wet. Those little dots in yellow are here. So now with my brush, I'm just gonna be more careful, okay? And go around them. It's okay if there's white of the paper as you go around them. Okay. I'm getting a little bit of orange because my flowers are not entirely dry. So I'm gonna have to wait. You wait also if you're doing this with me. You see, this is getting dark because my flowers are not entirely dry. And my green is getting mixed with my red. So just be careful. I'm getting my green. Yep, I'm just gonna wait. And as I wait, as we wait, we're gonna get in the areas that we know we can see we can. I can see I can maybe get in there, maybe here. Okay, but I gotta wait a little. Maybe these mountains over here need a little higher to go higher. Let's see. And I'll take advantage of this to make these mountains darker. And by making them darker, make these ones go over these other ones. And make these ones go over, meaning this mountain is in front of this one by making the skirt of the mountain go in front, you see right here, of the other one. That's too dark, but you get the point. Okay. So the bottom is not finished because we have to wait a little, and I think we're out of time. But yeah, let's do some birds in the sky. The way you do a bird or a couple of birds is by size, right? As you make them smaller, they be looking that they're flying farther away. But let's do a couple. It's like a wider spread curvy letter M. They do this a lot on the seascapes when they painting the ocean. But look, don't be afraid, and then do a, like I said, a very spread out curvy M. See that? And if I do a couple more different sizes, what it looks like is some of them are flying farther away. I learned this very young because I saw it being done in a painting, like I said earlier, of the water, of the ocean. The little ones are farther away. You don't have to put detail at all. I'm gonna, on the big ones, kind of do a little center ball right here. That's their body. And that's it. I will sign it after, but I think I'm happy. You see the little birds? They're just letter M's. Very spread out white. And then the big ones, you do the body with a little dot in the center. And the flowers, you see the effect. It does clearly looks like a field of flowers. And don't worry, even though this looks white in between, I'm gonna go back once everything dries with my green. And I'm gonna be careful to go around it because this is not crayon. This down here is watercolor. So if I go on my green on top of the yellow, it will it will cover that yellow. And I don't want that. So I'm gonna go in between and look. As I do that, do not worry if you get white paper shown. That's gonna be part of your painting and it's gonna look great, okay? So don't worry about that. And that's it. Sign it. You see how the reflection of the light kind of fools us on the mountains, but you can see the mountain edges on the top are darker, and the mountains could look a little more realistic when you create the little skirt of the mountain in front of another one like this. Great. Very green spring day, cloudy, sunny day, flower field scene. If you wish to go back with your orange on the flowers here in the back, because this is a little more pronounced color, you're free to do that. Don't go too far down here because this is farther away. Okay? Clean your materials so they last longer. Put them away. I'm gonna end saying, obviously there's another video coming up. I haven't decided. Maybe it's another watercolor painting. I know those are the paintings you have at home. Watercolor. So maybe we'll do another watercolor. Maybe we'll do paper quilling. Or go back to the drawing. I haven't decided yet, but something that I want to emphasize, even if you don't keep your materials of art in a corner out, do keep a space in your house where you're going to do your art, okay? Have a designated area where you do the art, even though that area has other things constantly, and it's not all the time, let's say clear, like this table I have here, that's fine. But you know that's where you go to do your art, and you know your art materials are close by in a bin. So you could just quickly clear your area, get out the art materials, and get to work. Otherwise, it's just a hassle, a thing that you unconsciously won't do as much because of you don't know where things are, or you don't know even where you're gonna do your work. So have a designated area, even though it's not always clear, and try to take time to do art, especially in the morning when we have a little bit of more energy. And great, keep doing art, keep practicing. I'll see you next time. Thank you.